Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Be Her Village podcast. My name is Caitlin Lagreus, and I'm the founder of Be Her Village. Be Her Village is an online gift registry for what moms really need: support, not stuff. We're talking to providers and people who care for moms in their pregnancy, their birth, their postpartum. We're talking to real moms and hearing their stories and really just getting into all the good stuff that comes along with new parenthood. So check us out, tune in, and let us know what you think.
Hello. This is Janelle with the Be Her Village podcast. I'm super excited to introduce this week's episode. It's with a dear friend of mine. Caitlin is talking with Brian Costello, and they're talking about his home births. Well, the home births that him and his wife had, I should say. In this episode, we get to talk about the partner perspective of pregnancy, birth, and navigating parenthood, as they have two little ones who are 2 and just a couple months old now. So in this episode, they talk about what it's like to have to kind of give up control in terms of being able to fix things and sometimes even do anything, and what that was like for Brian and in his experience, coming from being a business owner and a coach and a doer to having to then kind of sit back to sort of allow the natural process of pregnancy and birth to just happen, where he couldn't always have an active part in that and what that was like for him. They talk about doulas and why doulas are so important for partners, why they're not a threat, and why they are so helpful. And they also talk about this idea of having realistic expectations where you're not focused only on this is rainbows and butterflies, and you're also keeping yourself protected from horrible stories that scare you and make you dwell on negative, awful things that most likely won't happen. But finding a balance of having some sort of a plan and understanding that sometimes the plan doesn't go the right way, and really being okay with whatever outcome. So I think this episode is great for soon-to-be dads or partners of any kind who are stepping into this world of pregnancy and birth, and sort of a new perspective on, what to expect while you are the onlooker and not the active person in birth. So share this with a dad-to-be or somebody else who is going to give birth soon, and enjoy.
So for full disclosure for everyone who's listening, I was your doula for your first and second babies, which are all of your babies at this point. But I remember distinctly at the second one, we were all planning like the date and time of the third baby. So I expect a call later this year.
Yes. Give us a little more time, a little bit of a bigger gap this time, we think, but don't go too far.
I won't. You guys are one of the few people that I will go back on call for and support, because I love you all. So let's talk about it. I think the partner perspective is so important and not often talked about. And I think you have a really great way of just speaking about and thinking about things. And I would love to kind of just get into what it's like to be the father, what it's like to be the husband, what it's like to be the partner who's watching and experiencing pregnancy and birth and parenthood, but not as the person whose body is changing and going through that. So I think probably the easiest place to start is just like kind of chronologically. What was it like for you supporting Brienne through her pregnancy? What was your experience of the pregnancy?
I'll before I answer that, I'll say I do agree with you that the partner perspective, I think, can be really valuable, but it's not as often that you hear the partner perspective. And I know that during the process, for us leading into our decision on whether or not we wanted to do home birth or how we wanted to do it and all that stuff, the few times I did hear partner perspectives, it was very enlightening and very profound, just to hear a different point of view for me specifically, because I was hearing plenty of viewpoints from the female side, but I wanted to hear from the partner side. So, so the pregnancies, it was interesting. The whole kind of thing from my perspective is like, I can't really, or it seemingly can't do too much, right? We feel very like, okay, this is sort of out of my hands. It's not really, but it's our immediate instinct, I think, as men, or it's not always men, but for me particularly, being a male partner and the kind of masculine mindset of like, we want, to be kind of in control, kind of doing, action oriented, solution oriented, make it happen, get it done kind of thing. And all of a sudden we're in this position where we can't do so much, it's just like, we're more there for support and just like connecting and hearing and listening to her needs and what she wants, what she needs, how she's feeling, all those types of things. And then in many cases, based on what she's telling me, I still might not be able to do much other than continue to just comfort and support and all those things. So having, that felt different than what our relationship had felt like in the past, and just what my life sort of feels like normally in general. I own a business. I'm a boss. I have employees. I'm used to kind of like being like the decision maker and making things happen and taking control all the time. And all of a sudden it's now a more passive position for me. So that was the biggest change. I don't know if it was, I never felt like, I didn't have a lot of like negative feelings. It was just different, it was just different than I expected. And I had to continue to just remember that, this is all, stuff that she intuitively knows how to do and has all of the tools and things that she needs. And I don't need to be the one to have all the answers. Right. So that was one of the biggest things. And then, just moving through the pregnancy, it was a great experience for me to just observe and learn alongside of her. She was doing a lot of research, reading books, like Natural Mama. Was it called Natural Mama? I think it was one of the books that we really liked. And she was kind of reading it and sharing it with me, pretty much every step of the way. And I think the education side of it was really important. It was also enlightening. It was also, it helped us connect and, learn together and discuss some things. And then also the decision-making process of like throughout the pregnancy, how to, the lifestyle we wanted to live during pregnancy, things, eating, sleeping, all that stuff, which was very important to us, just discussing it and, discussing what's the biggest priorities, and then, whether or not we're going to do home birth and what that would look like, and the risk, rewards, factors, all that stuff. It really brought us closer and I don't say forced, but, created a space for us to connect more deeply and share more deeply about things that are really important to us. And overall, it was a very positive experience,
Yeah.
And luckily, I was going to say one last thing. Luckily, we agreed on most things, so that made things easier. I know that's not always the case, but we were fortunate enough to pretty much be on seeing it the same way.
Yeah, this is all, I feel like there's so many things I want to touch on. Number one, when you began talking about like going from this place where you are the boss and like not in your relationship, but in your professional world, mm-hmm. but then even in your relationship pre-pregnancy, there's this masculine urge to like fix, mm-hmm. and it feels, from what you said, like when pregnancy starts happening, there's this like lack of control. There's a little bit of helplessness that comes with it, which doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think it's kind of part of the natural process, but that could be a sticky point for some people. And it's interesting because pregnancy, I think there's this like idea that, I don't know, it just changes the woman's life. It just, her body changes, everything shifts for her. And the guy just keeps going to work and keeps coming home. And there's not really a shift for him. But what you're describing is actually a huge shift from someone who can take action to do things to someone who has to kind of sit back and let her take the way, let her educate you, have the information, and it shifts the relationship pretty early on. Yeah,
definitely. And, the word that popped to my mind was like a practice of kind of surrendering some of that control, or control, I guess would be the word. But really that was preparation, because, during the actual birth, which I'm sure, which we'll get to here, that's where I really have to focus on that surrender and trusting her and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's not just at the birth though. It starts earlier on.
It's so funny because as becoming a mother and birthing, it's been like this process of realizing that the whole pregnancy is the preparation for the labor and birth, and the whole labor and birth is just preparation for parenthood. because we think we have control, right? We like start out as like childless people, and the world centers around us just naturally. That's the state we're in. And then pregnancy, and then birth, and then, oh God, there's like this little being that actually has all the control and yet thinks that they have none, and then fight us for it. It's quite a dynamic. I would love to, before we move on to what the labor and birth looked like, I would love to talk a little bit about what that decision-making process looked like for you, because, you said you guys agreed on a lot, so it went fairly smoothly. But as a doula, I have seen many, many, many couples, many women say, I want this, but my husband would never go for it. I want this, my husband's not comfortable with it. And there's this, pull of, and oftentimes in those situations, it's often that the woman has done the research. She understands what she wants based on information, and the husband isn't doing the research and is going on this like emotional, he has a fear maybe instilled in him from childhood or just like movies or, and there's this like resistance to information. So can you talk a little bit more about where you started? I'd love to hear. I know where you guys ended up. You ended up giving birth in your living room twice, right? So where did you start? Did you ever have a feeling or a sense about the type of birth that your partner would have, or where did you begin in the beginning?
Yeah, good question. So when Brienne first became pregnant with her first child, Renly, we were kind of in the midst, or we had been now for a few years, really changing our lifestyle quite a bit, where we were always very much into fitness because I owned a gym, a CrossFit gym with a big community, and that was kind of our life. I had sold that a couple years before she was born, and we had started to really explore health a little bit more deeply and more like holistically. So just a lot of just connecting with nature. We changed the way we were eating and sleeping and all of these things, and just kind of started getting exposed to more ways of thinking other than just like the traditional conventional decisions regarding anything. And so our minds were in a good place. They were very, pretty open. We were pretty keen on the, aware of a lot of the downsides of just conventional medicine and things that could possibly go wrong, and that there's a lot, layers there's layers to the whole, modern healthcare, modern medicine stuff, right? And there's problems in all of those layers. And we just, like, whether or not they were true or false, whatever, you just know that there's things to learn and things to look into. So we were pretty open. And I remember actually a member of our gym, when we still owned it, had done a home birth a year or two earlier, and we kind of thought it was a little crazy, like, wow, home birth, like you delivered in the bathtub, like that's nuts,
I mean, I've like already had a home birth, and I still think it's crazy.
Right. Exactly. And we weren't like, oh my God, I would never do that kind of thing. It was just sort of like planted this seed in our mind, and he was just so cool, like calm about it. Like, yeah, it's just like how, it's how birthing used to be, and we had like kind of talked about at the time, like, well, would we ever do that? I don't know. It's kind of crazy, whatever. A couple of years later, like, the topic came up again, and I can't remember, but I was kind of like leaning towards it myself, but I knew it wasn't going to be up to me. And I had a feeling it could be a tough sell on her and her family and all that stuff. And I wasn't like, oh, like we have to do it this way. I was just like, let's explore it. And, but really Brienne, she went to her first appointment, her first OB appointment, first and only ever OB appointment. And, right after we found out she was pregnant, and it was just not a good experience. It was very impersonal. She remembers, she kind of tells her, like, no one even said like, oh, congratulations or anything. It just went right to like the paperwork. How do you feel? What is this? And then the doctor came in, and he was immediately, again, just kind of write down the business and going through the checklist. And when I believe it was either a 5-week or 8-week sonogram he suggested, and she said, I don't really feel comfortable doing a sonogram yet. I'd like to wait. And he immediately was like, you can't wait. The baby could have this. You could have this. You could die. Really fear-based, very aggressively fear-based. And she was like, what, what's going on? And she left there just like, this is not what we're doing. And I forget what happened next, if we immediately contacted Guy or who. I don't remember how we bridged that gap specifically, but the idea of doing it a different way immediately became the conversation. And so then but we had a lot of research to do. All we remembered was our one friend from the gym, that all we ever knew. So she started researching the most, right? And this is to your point of what usually happens. The mother's out there kind of doing research, connecting. I forget exactly what and where and what she was doing, but she was finding stuff, podcasts and whatnot like this. What we did well, though, the key was she was relaying things back to me constantly, right? And luckily I was already in a place where I was pretty open to it, and actually maybe even more open than her at first. So I was very receptive, but I still needed that, to hear these kind of stories and to just hear the actual facts about the stats and things regarding safety and regarding transitions to, how often that happens. I was still in the place where I thought that this was a very risky thing, and it was important to do that kind of research and communicate it and talk about it because it helped me realize it's really not that risky. In fact, it may even be safer depending on how you look at it and what's more important to you. So the communication side, I think, is really clear. And I know for men, again, if we're not doing it, and this sounds crazy, for home birth specifically, and I think for men, what I would suggest, if there's any men listening to this, and if there's fear, that emotional response of I don't know, I don't like this, is fear, really just to sit with that a little bit and ask yourself, well, where's the fear coming from? Am I afraid? I think everyone's like, well, if something went wrong, I would never be able to live with myself, kind of thing. Well, that can happen either way, right? Something could go wrong, home or in the hospital. And ultimately that's a result of which way we decided to choose. Is it more of because in the hospital, if something goes wrong, I can it's easy to it's not my fault kind of thing, where at home it would feel like it was my fault? Is that it? Or is it the control thing where I can't do it, so I feel more comfortable being in a hospital with doctors? Or, do I truly trust the nature of the female body and what it's capable of, and kind of the feminine force and the midwives and the doulas and everybody else on that side? Ultimately, I have to put my trust in someone else, and if I don't trust one side or another, why not? And what am I really afraid of? And am I willing to challenge myself on that? Am I open to hearing other opinions, listening to things like this, reading articles? If I'm not going to be open, I think if a husband is not really open to other ideas but has a strong opinion, that's not very fair, right? It's you're more, obviously we can all have our opinions, but we should really be having those opinions based on hearing all of the information that's available.
Absolutely. I love that. And what I'm thinking about as I listen to this is how this decision about where to birth and who's on your support team and all of these, there's just, when it comes to pregnancy and birth and parenting, there's just nothing but decisions to be made. It really is almost like it's a test of your relationship in a lot of ways, because it's not hunky-dory and you're just walking through this life totally unscathed, and then suddenly you have this tough decision. It's just one of many decisions that you have to communicate on and leave room for the other person, and and it's super gray and super murky, and there's not necessarily a right or a wrong, but it's really about the communication factor and about allowing space for those feelings, because a partner that's not necessarily open is valid also, it's not ideal, but it's like, it's also really valid for them to have fears, but often those fears are based on something being closed off and not being able to, it's a cycle, right? Where we're afraid, so we can't take more information in, but like the reason we're afraid is because we're not able to take more information in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I would like to talk about midwives and doulas. So one thing I just want to state for everything you just said was so beautiful, and I just want to put this like little asterisk for people, because this isn't like a pro home birth podcast. It just happens to be that you guys had home births. That it's not necessarily like this choice of hospital with providers or home birth trusting the feminine sense. Like, there's medical providers at home birth. It's not like, there's a lot of trust and like understanding, but there's also like people with drugs and tools and medical knowledge. The other thing I'd like to address is just the idea of hiring a doula. So obviously you guys hire doulas for both births, and I was lucky enough to attend both of your births. One of the things that I hear so often, and it's one of the like when I'm meeting with a couple that's considering a doula, I often address the partner first and not the pregnant person, because often the pregnant person or the woman is the reason why we're in the room with them. It's typically the partner who's like got some sort of skepticism of either just feeling neutral, like they don't understand the benefit, or feeling like doulas are a threat. And I can support my woman. I can do everything I need to do for her. Why am I going to pay money for somebody else to take my place? So I'd love to hear what your feeling and perspective. How did you learn about doulas? How did you feel about having a doula before the birth? And then what was it like actually experiencing doula support?
That's a great question. I think I was also a little skeptical at first as well. Like, well, yeah, like why do we need this? Like, I support you. We have this relation, like I'm going to be there for you and all that stuff. But once I learned more about it and understand, in my mind, the way I understand it is like the doula is pretty much there for the birther, the wife, the woman, and the midwife is more there for the baby, right? The delivery side. Like, that's just kind of the loose frame I have in my mind. So when I kind of saw it that way and understood it, I was like, okay. Again, I feel confident in my ability to support and all these things, but I've never done this before. You know what I mean? And again, there's some fear around like how this is going to go and all these things. And I just personally in my life, I'm always looking to, if there's someone that's done something before, like if I'm going to do something and I can learn from somebody who's done it before, like I immediately gravitate towards that person, whether it's hiring a mentor, a business coach, a actual health coach, whatever. I've always found that the experience is someone else's experience is the best, is incredibly invaluable. So once I just got a more clear idea of what it was for and how it worked, it seemed, I can't remember, like now it feels like a no-brainer, but I don't remember at the time if it felt like fully like a no-brainer, but I was definitely open to it. Our financial situation at the time was really tight, and that was definitely a factor. But at the same time, to like potentially have somebody there or not who can make a big difference in the overall experience, not just making like, oh, it was just making it a better experience, but making it actually, having the birth actually go the way we were hoping and planning or not. To me, there wasn't really, at what point, what price can you put on that, right? So, we were in a really tough position, but we were willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. So anyway, so we went and obviously chose to do it that way. And it was really, right off the bat, it immediately was confirming that it was the right decision, because we were able to participate in some things beforehand. And this was with True Birth at the time. And we did some exercise. We met with the group and all these things, and realized, okay, there's like preparation to be done. This isn't just someone that just shows up on the day of the birth and like, hey, nice to meet you, right? We were able to connect ahead of time, feel comfortable, get things explained to us of what you'd be able to really do and how you'd be able to help, and what the value was, not just like, oh, here's what it costs. Like, well, what's the actual value? And it immediately was comforting and confirming that was the right decision. And then, of course, when you arrived and when we first got there, or I think actually Brienne called you first when we were first starting, whatever, and you were able to immediately, the value was recognizable right away. You were able to talk before you even got there, just on the phone, just talking to her, kind of coaching her through what she was feeling. Our situation specifically, she used a Foley balloon to naturally induce, and it was like 0 to 100 really fast. So she's like, oh my God, what's going on? And you were able to kind of talk her through it and coach her. And then basically like, all right, I'm heading over, and then I immediately, like when you arrived, I immediately felt so much better because I was like, okay, someone's here who's been here before, who's done these things before, and is not freaking out. Like we were kind of like, oh, is this okay? This seems fast. Like, of course. And then like, the fears were kicking up of like, was this the right decision and all that stuff. And then you were immediately there and just a calming presence of like, yeah, no, this is how it goes. This is how it works. And you were, again, like you played that role of being there for her right off the bat. It's just, putting pressure on her low back, talking to her through the contractions, things that I had, did not know how to do, even though, again, I was like, oh, no, I know how to support. Like, I didn't know any of that stuff, obviously. So I was able to learn from you. You were able to show me some things to help. And then because it was a long labor through the night where we tried to take turns sleeping and things like that, to have an extra, she was pretty much up the whole time. So to have someone there to always be with her, or helping us when we needed to be with her, there was, at no point in time was I like, what is this, why do we need this? Like that, those thoughts were gone immediately. And I was very, very happy with the situation and very glad to have you there.
Awesome. Well, I was very glad to be there. Yeah, I think what you just described is something that took me as a doula a long time to figure out, because I would do that. I would talk on the phone with a couple, and typically I would actually, when it was time to come in, it's time to get in, because you like check in with the woman often throughout the day, and then you get a call from her partner, and it's like, okay, now she can't even get on the phone. It's time. But I would show up to births, and as like a newer doula, I would show up to births, and I would not like, if there's an exercise in like, and this is an internal thing for me of like, feeling like I had to do something to like produce doula work, and I would feel not valuable. I would sit there and not understand how I was adding value to a situation until after the birth, they would say to me, oh my God, he was freaking out before you walked in the door. And as soon as you walked in the door, the whole situation calmed down, which is why from my perspective, I'm like, what am I even doing here? Everyone's so calm and it's all just unfolding, Right. But I think that there's this feeling of you've never seen your partner in that state before. And it's really hard to show up to emotionally support her when you don't know if it's an emergency, when you don't know if you're supposed to like bring her to the hospital, So to have somebody come in who's seen hundreds of births and just look at her and be like, cool, it's just like another day at the office, it really takes the whole anxiety level down an incredible amount. So I'm glad to hear that was your experience.
Absolutely. And I'll backtrack one step too, because to talk about just like how there's also the medical aspect in the home birth as well. When Colleen arrived as the midwife and stuff, and I saw how it wasn't just, like giving, it's not like just giving birth in the woods. Like, there's
not like midwives show up with like crystals and sage, like they have equipment.
Yes, there's equipment. And it was like, she's like with her assistant tracking everything, talking back and forth, taking, reading the heart rates and this and that, and doing all the testing. And like between both sides, I was like, whew, I immediately felt like an overwhelming, I actually felt, I talked about it afterwards in both births, but this one I wasn't as surprised. But the first time I talked about, I was surprisingly calm. Like I felt, once it was like going and we were like, all right, we're in it now, and kind of just working through the labor, I really felt so much more calm than I expected, and wasn't like, oh my God, what's going on here? Once like the initial shock when we were in it, I felt surprisingly calm, and that was due to both sides of that and the support team and everybody there.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that was your experience. I would love for you to sort of walk us through, for people who are listening to this and their wife or their girlfriend or their partner is pregnant and they have, part of the issue in America, right, and maybe across the world, is that birth is behind closed doors. We don't see it. It's not in the communities. It's not in the homes. We're not watching labor. All we see are like 30-second horrifying, like water breaks, woman screams, baby comes out in Hollywood. So for the people who have never experienced birth and labor as a partner, what was it like? Like, what did Brienne look like? What were the scary parts? What were the cool parts? What were the gross parts? Like, what did it feel like to be the partner in the room?
Yeah. So one thing I'll say first though too is so I recently shared a video. So both times we had some video clips, and I have some experience with editing, and I really feel I go back and forth on whether or not I want to share that stuff and whatnot. Brienne, like, sometimes like big on sharing it because she's like giving labor and like, in labor or giving birth, I should say, and not feeling super like pretty and stuff. But I think it's important to share because of, like you said, mostly what people see are these misconstrued, Hollywood, like if they see anything. So to be able to shed some light on the fact that this was a beautiful, peaceful, amazing experience, I think can be really helpful for people who are maybe on the fence or whatever. But so the experience itself, though, it like you said before, it's hard to see my wife all of a sudden like just thrusted into this place of like pain and discomfort and all these things, and again feel kind of helpless and being able to do much about it. I mean, again, we can put pressure on her back and like talk her through certain things, but we can't make the pain go away, right? So that was tough at first, especially with Renly, the first one, because it was so long. Riker felt to me like a picnic compared to Renly because it just seemed so much shorter. It didn't go through the night. I'm careful not, when I say that to her, because I know it didn't feel like a picnic to her.
Still feeling that nearly 9-pound baby coming out. But you're right. I think I was there for 2 hours, maybe, when he came. Right. Yeah.
I think Colleen arrived around 6:30, and he was born at 9:30. So the whole thing was really a much more brief. But yeah, she wouldn't use the word picnic to describe it. So
if we're gonna give new dads tips, maybe number one is don't describe labor as a picnic.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, so it was challenging, because I was like, I would do anything to make this pain go away. But there's, again, there's nothing I could really do there. And, just through the night, trying to sleep, she kept waking up and just hurting and rolling over and in like essentially agony. It's a tough thing. It's very challenging. And there were points where I felt very calm, like I said, but there were certain points where I'm like, oh man, like, is this okay? Is this normal for it to go this long? Or is this a bad sign? You know what I mean? And, obviously between you and Colleen and everybody being so calm and collected over it, it assured me that everything was okay. But those feelings are, I think, probably common and natural to be like, is this right? Like, is this supposed to be this long? Is this happening? Like, is this stalling? Is this, whatever? Do we need to transition or all this stuff? But it was just tough. And I think that's where the preparation comes in. The second time around, both times I was pretty prepared, but the second time I knew what to expect a little bit more. And my preparation was remembering that, hey, I'm not going to be able to do too much to make like the pain go away, or to actually like whether or not the birthing goes as planned isn't, there's not much I can do to determine whether or not the birthing is going to go as planned, or to, like I said, to make Brienne feel better or be in less pain or any of those things. But that's where I turn to just like my trust in, again, her as a woman and her power and her strength, in our intuition and our natural design, that this has been done billions of times and will continue to be done billions of times. And it's what she's designed to do. She has every bit of ability and skill and information inside of her to know exactly what to do and at what time and when and where. And the baby does too, right? The baby's just doing what it's supposed to do. There's no real like I don't want to say you can't make a mistake, but it's like there's not it's like a surrender, right? It's just she's just more kind of letting it happen, and the baby's letting it happen, and I'm letting it happen, and we're all kind of just trusting that and surrendering to it. And for me, the preparation was coming back to that and knowing that in those moments I was just going to have to be able to do that. So I wasn't, just from the scary, there wasn't as much fear this time or scariness, but like seeing her just in pain and just sweating and breathing and screaming and like it can be uncomfortable for sure. But
there was an enormous amount of screaming in that first birth. A lot of screaming.
That's, again, and I thought in my mind, I was like, okay, she's going to scream like that at the end for a little bit, but for 15 hours on and off of screaming, like, holy crap,
I think it's funny too, because there's this sense of like home birth. If you look up home birth videos, which, I highly recommend everybody watch as many birth videos as you can, but like, there's always these women who are like so peaceful and calm. It's a little bit like your videos, well edited, to just take all of the screaming out and like put some nice music over it, and there's these montage and there's these like totally peaceful women who just like breathe and like a baby emerges from the pool. It caught me off guard at my home birth, like just how much screaming there was and how much pain there was, because I think there's a little bit of a misconception that home birth is painless and quiet and peaceful. And like, that's not true. It's all the things that come along with any birth. They just happen to be in your living room for a home birth.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point. And when I edit the videos and stuff, it's not to like, mislead anybody, right? But it's just, no one really wanted, and Brianna's just like, she didn't want like her screaming in the video. It's not really like a pleasant thing necessarily, unless you're there and you're like, love the person and you're part of it. But yeah, I think though too, it's important. I think though in nature, in something like this is it's not always pretty and peaceful, right? Like, but the end result is, right? It's still the end result of this beautiful thing, even though there's blood and fluids and screaming. And it's just, if we can still see the beauty in that, not necessarily just seeing the beauty in that and almost like getting a deeper appreciation for that side of it, for the work that needs to be done, for the fear that needs to be overcome, for the endurance and the strength, and to do this for 15 hours, and just like what the human body is physically capable of, to see that all as part of it, as the miracle that it is, I think is important, right? To not say like, oh, like that's bad or anything like that. But yeah, it's like Brianne would say, and I'm sure most women would say, they don't feel pretty during it. They don't look like, they're grunting and screaming and sweating and whatever and all this stuff. But if we can just, I guess, accept that for as part of the experience, I think it adds to the beauty. So she was doing the first birthing, she was doing some hypnobirthing meditations and stuff. And it was she was too late to join the classes and do it like with a teacher, but she was doing the recordings and meditations, and it did maybe mislead us a little bit, like that she was going to be able to just, breathe through the contractions and not let it like feel the pain and stuff. Not to say like the program isn't good or anything like that, but she kind of joking like that went at like first contractions and that was like out the window, it could be misleading. It's not pain-free. It's not fear-free, but it's for us it was still the decision that we felt was best. But there's no way around that, I don't think.
Yeah, well, this is exactly why we're having that conversation though, because I think maybe some people do have pain-free and fear-free births using hypno tools, and I think there's a lot of variations of normal.
Yes.
And the more we can talk about the real perspective of it, the better, for sure. I would like to ask kind of a personal question, and if you're not comfortable, we'll just cut the whole thing. But one of the things that women that I speak to, and myself included, talk about is this like feeling with birth and specifically like with birth and breastfeeding and this sense of our bodies kind of going from like this thing that we use for pleasure, right? Like we're with our partner and we're having sex and we're like physically having a great relationship. And then suddenly motherhood kind of thrusts our body into this utilitarian use, right? And I think a lot of women struggle with that. And I think a lot of relationships and partnerships struggle with that. So I wonder if you could give us a little insight into like what that was like for you to go from, you know, a couple without children who I'm assuming have like a thriving sex life and a physical relationship, what it was like to kind of have your partner's body become a tool for growing a baby and then nourishing that baby. What is that like? Not only in like the larger sense, but also I'm imagining that some men, I've seen them in the hospital room that are listening to this are like, I am not looking down there. I don't want to see a baby coming out. I don't want to see blood. The whole thing like kind of grosses them out. Yeah. So could you speak to sort of the partner perspective of that shift?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. Yeah, it's different, right? It's definitely been changes now as parents in those regards. And one of the things I was a little, I don't say confused, but at first, so for me, I find Brienne very attractive in her full, you know, feminine motherhood, all that stuff, right? So just watching her just care for the babies and, you know, and you know, birth the baby, you know, even during pregnancy, I find it attractive in a different way, right? I just see her, you know, a different kind of attractive than like, you know, maybe when we were in our 20s kind of thing and whatnot. But like, it's a different bond, right? A different emotional connection that goes with it as well. So, however, she didn't necessarily feel all that attractive, right? So there's like this, we were on like kind of different wavelengths, and especially after the birth in the first month or two and both times around, where again, I think it's just a deeper love really right now, new dynamic, new baby. I'm so like proud of her, like watching everything that went through. And again, there's attraction there. And one of the, just, you know, when Riker was born recently, a conversation that we had, because, you know, a couple months go by and I'm looking to kind of get things started again, you know, kind of back to normal, and she not necessarily feeling that way at all. And there could be, I wouldn't say we had any like rifts or anything, but, you know, we had some little different feelings at certain times. But one of the things she said to me that made sense, I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. She said, my body's just being used for different things right now, and just feels like it's just, that's the only thing it really wants to do. And it was the way she said it to me that time really made me like understand it better and respect it. I was like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. I get that, right? She's breastfeeding, right? She's just gone through delivering the baby, so she's been in pain down there for a while and all this types of stuff. She's carrying extra weight. She doesn't necessarily like just feel, you know, sexy, right? And stuff like that. So it can be, I can, yeah, like we've had some differences there, and I'm sure that that's very common. Again, I just think communication is really the key, right? Like, can you communicate about it? Can you be open about it? Because again, even her saying that one line changed my whole perspective on it. I wish she had told me earlier or at other times, right? But that's okay. Like once it said, it just finally clicked for me. Like, oh, that makes sense, and I get that. So yeah, I think you know. So now Riker's 2.5 months old or whatever, and things are starting to kind of normalize and come back. And alone time is kind of a thing of the past now, anyway, and whatnot. But again, it's just kind of like we're starting to just slowly work back towards a more romantic relationship. Just finding time to spend together to just talk and stuff is a step. And like we went out on a date, you know, we dropped Renly off at her parents the other night. We went out on a little date, and like Riker was with us and stuff. But that was like the first time we even were able to do something like that in a while, and just like start to bring the romantic connection back in slowly. I've just, you know, I've had to be patient. I think she didn't necessarily feel like she's being as patient as I am, because she's not really so into it at the time. But you know, it's just something I have to learn to respect, and you know, as part of the process, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
I think two thoughts come to my mind. One is this, like that thing that she said to you is helping you not take it personally. Because I think anytime that there's like a difference in libido and interest in sex in a relationship, whether it's surrounding birth or not, it can feel really personal, and it often, almost all the time, has nothing to do with the partner. It has to do with what's going on for us. The other thing I'm thinking is just like kind of going back to the theme that has gone through this conversation about like our natural way as humans, as human beings, you know, as like mammals, and thinking about how it makes sense that we are highly active sexually and then we get pregnant, and as just females, we are preventing our bodies from getting pregnant again because we have this little being that's nursing. Like breastfeeding is a very biological process, and it decreases the hormones that make us want to have sex, which makes tons of sense in a biological, like, caveman perspective, but definitely creates some frustration in the modern monogamous marriage, I think. So it's a really interesting kind of like perspective on it, that it's not personal and it's not forever. It's just sort of the natural evolution of pregnancy.
Right. And you're right. And when, like, she said that to me, you're right. It made it feel like, okay, it's not me necessarily. Right. So that, it just feels better. And then that allowed me to be like more patient about it, more respectful about it, and just like understanding of it.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so as we wrap up, I would love to have you give some sort of concrete tips, speaking directly to the men and partners that are listening. You've talked a lot about preparation. I prepared. You've talked a lot about the emotional side of the experience for you. If someone is listening right now and hasn't gone through this yet, what should they be doing? What like tangible things should they be doing? Is it a book you recommend? Is it a class? Is it something else?
Yeah. So when it comes to preparation, like, so the first thing is, I don't have any specific books or anything that I remember or I think I've read. I mean, the Natural Mama book was one that Brianne read that we kind of like read together. That was phenomenal. But I think just absorbing as much, this kind of content as possible, and hearing firsthand accounts. To me, firsthand accounts in any of this kind of stuff are the most valuable. So if you see someone, first I'll speak to home birth first, because that's a lot of times the one that's people really on the fence about. If you see someone that's had one, posted pictures, reach out to them, ask them, can we do a little call? Can we meet for coffee? Can we do, I'd like to hear more, and just listen and listen to the experience and put yourself in those shoes based on their experience, and ask them, could I handle that? Does that sound more in line with what we believe, or does, the more traditional sense or whatever? And then ask them this question, like, where did they learn? Who did they talk to? They'll probably have things to pass along as well. So I'd say that, and I'd say do it all with an open mind, and ask yourself, again, like I mentioned before, if there's fear coming up, or I don't like that, not my thing, why? Why not? What's the real fear there? Because in my experience with any of this type of stuff is, when you come to a decision, but we don't want to make the decision out of fear, right? Like one way or the other. It doesn't want to be because I'm doing this because I'm scared of the other one, or something like that, right? We want to say, this is what I choose because this is most aligned with my beliefs. Operating out of a sense of fear is just not going to bring us, when things can potentially get hairy during birth, and either way, if we're just acting out of fear all the time, there's just, normally does not end in the best possible scenario. And then in the preparation, like I do a lot of meditation, not like always sitting still with my eyes closed for long periods of time kind of meditation, but just putting myself in visuals, like visualizing it, the birthing and it happening. And again, trusting, but also putting, okay, what if this goes wrong? What if she's having extreme pain and we have to transition? What if she's bleeding like crazy and out of nowhere and we're rushing to the hospital, right? Like, is unlikely as that is, and as hard as that would be to kind of like think about, it's like, all right, if it's a possibility, or if it's something that I'm afraid of, I should sit with that a little bit and ask myself, what am I going to do in those situations? Not necessarily what am I physically going to do, but like, how am I going to conduct myself? Am I going to be able to stay calm and breathe and and trust it and make decisions rationally and communicate, or am I going to freak out and lose my mind? And that preparation was really important for me, and that's what kept me saying, keep bringing me back to, this has been done billions of times, and it goes smoothly. And could something go wrong? Like, yeah, it could, but what am I going to do when that happens? And am I still going to trust that this will all work out, and that she has everything she needs? So I don't have any specific meditations or anything.
But just meditating, I think, is I don't think we need like the YouTube link, but like literally just, I think a lot of men don't meditate and maybe discover it later on in their lives, if at all. So just basic meditation, basic connecting with your emotions and feelings, like sitting with a fear is kind of foreign to some people, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And again, a lot of times I would just, I'll just drive without the, music on, or just, I'm thinking about the birth. And if I feel a feeling in my stomach of like, oh yeah, it's getting close. Oh yeah, I'm a little scared. Like what's the feeling from, what am I actually scared of? What is, is it just because it's, I'm nervous, a little nervous going in, obviously, like it's a big thing. It's a big, important, exciting thing. Yeah. And with some fear built in, of course, a little bit, trying not to, but like, I'm at least comfortable with what the fears are. Like I know what they are and what I'm most afraid of, and stuff like that. And I think that's really, really important. If every time those feelings come up, we just shove them away and distract ourselves or pick up our phone or whatever, we're not really making any progress. And when the time comes, we could be thinking from that fear.
What I love about that, and I want to kind of address as our final point, is this toxic positivity that exists in the natural birth space. And it riles me to no end. And I feel like I was a little bit of a victim of it myself for my first birth, because there was this sense of like, I think there was two different ideas that blended into one, and I totally missed the point on it. So this idea that we should keep ourselves in a positive mind space. So we shouldn't listen to horror stories. We shouldn't hear about every birth that went wrong and every mother that died and like all these horrible, horrible things that exist. We shouldn't bombard ourselves with that. So yes, there is this like need for positivity in our mental space surrounding our birth. But then there's this internal experience. And I think that in an effort to be positive and to have a positive outlook, a lot of people, and I'm totally guilty of this, like just anytime something negative kind of came up, I just shoved it away because it wasn't positive. So I shoved it away like the external thoughts that were coming at me. And that was wrong. It didn't actually serve me, because I ended up then not being in tune with my feelings. And I wasn't listening, more importantly, I think, to those fears. Those fears tell us things. It's good information. It's like sometimes those fears are coming up because something isn't right, and something beyond our brain, like whatever deep wisdom and perception we have is bringing it up as a fear because we're not paying attention to it. Yeah. And so I'd love to hear just like a little bit about how you guys balance that, not having these bad, negative ideas enter your space while also being in tune with that internal experience.
Yeah, really, that's important. I think that everything comes up internally is some kind of like message, right? It's like giving us this thing that we should be addressing, not, like you said, just pushing away or just thinking positive, just like don't think about it kind of attitude. But yeah, so like I know you had the one call about the Netflix film that had this, and this was not long before birth. So Brianne was like, I'm not going to go on that call. I went on it because we just don't need to sit there and talk about like the potential downsides. We acknowledge them, we know they exist, but we don't need to necessarily be just like being bombarded with those feelings right now. But that's different than pretending like they don't exist or it can't happen kind of stuff. So yeah, I think this translates well into just all of life, right? That's like, it's not that everything is going to be perfect all the time and nothing bad will ever happen. It's just that we have to feel confident that when challenges arise and things go wrong, or even tragedy happens, that I'm capable of dealing with it and handling it. As long as I'm living in alignment with what I believe in, that I can even accept that if something goes tragically wrong, it was still the right decision. It was still the right decision, right? It was still what I thought was best. And that's hard, right? Like I'm not expecting people to be able to do that easily. But that's kind of how we have to see it, right? It's just that, it's not just being positive. It's just being aware and finding strength and knowing our strengths, right? It's not just this thinking everything is rainbows and butterflies all the time, right? So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think I'm glad that you brought it up because I think it's a very important part of the process.
Yeah, I think it answers it perfectly. So awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off completely? Is there anything you feel like you missed or you want to kind of have a final message?
No, I don't think so. But what I mentioned, reaching out, things like that, if there's anyone, the partner side or the mother side or anybody, myself and Brianne would be very open to sharing some more thoughts or anything like that. And you can find me on Instagram. I think it's best bcostello_023. That's the name of my company, 023 Holistic Systems. And she's at BRIENN.
Yeah, that's right.
But we'd love to talk and connect and just see if we can help in any way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian. This was awesome.
No problem. This is great.
You're so great. Cool. Thanks for taking the time to have this conversation.
Yep.
And send my love to Brianne and Riker and Renly. How is everybody doing, by the way?
Everyone's great. Everything's good. We're settling into the new dynamic.
The new normal.
Normal, yeah. It was hectic. It's still hectic, but we're kind of like it's expected to be hectic now. Like we get it. But Renly's still the main. She's the full-time job. Riker seems Riker's
easy right now. Yeah, it's so funny. Like when you have a newborn, the first time, just one, it feels so overwhelming, and then when you have a second one, you're like, oh my god, newborns are so easy compared to toddlers.
2-year-old, yeah, yes, I learned that really quick. But yeah, it's great, and she loves him. She's always hugging him, kissing him. He's so cute. He's so little. Like doing this, so she's great with him. It's awesome.
Oh, I love it. That's so great. Cool. All right, well, send my love to everybody. This was so great, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks, Brian. Bye.